Thank you, Jerusha, and thank you, Veena, for the Bible reading. And Sophia and Raj and Manisha, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Today, we are looking at Hannah, a wonderful woman of faith. For the Jewish people, Hannah is a pivotal person when it comes to the area of prayer. On Jewish New Year, her story is read as one of the most important passages of the day. Hannah dealt with a lot of difficulties in her life, but she was faithful in seeking out the Lord. Hannah was a woman of prayer. Hannah's name means grace. Grace is defined as undeserved love and favor of God towards mankind. There was a man named Elkanah. He was a Levite who lived in Ephraim. He came from a priestly family. He was a godly man. He had two wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah was able to have children, but Hannah wasn't. Because of this, Hannah was very sad. Barrenness was considered to be a curse from God, and children a blessing from God. All the women in those days wanted a male child because everybody knew that that's how the Messiah would come. Oh, sorry, Sophia, slide 2, please. I forgot slide 1. Peninnah didn't have any problems getting pregnant. She had many children. So slide 2, please. Peninnah's name means pearl or coral. Pearl means beautiful, and coral means beautiful, as well as venomous. In the ocean where we find pearls, there is coral reef. If you cut yourself on it, it's very hard to get healed. Although Peninnah is beautiful, she is spiteful, she is hateful, she is Hannah's enemy. Peninnah taunted and ridiculed Hannah, and this would upset Hannah. Hannah was a woman of grace, and she didn't respond to her harassment. Hannah couldn't give her husband any children, but she knew that her husband loved her. But she thought God had rejected her, and she was brokenhearted. Hannah was determined to surrender her and submit her cares before the Lord. She prayed through her pain and resolved to continue to trust God. According to the Bible, Hannah wasn't barren. Her room was temporarily closed by God for a reason. Sometimes God closes a door because he has something better for us. Sometimes God closes doors so that we can change directions. Sometimes God closes doors so that we can learn to pray strategically and precisely. Sometimes God closes doors so that we will stop trusting in man. Sometimes God closes doors when he's preparing us for the task ahead. Sometimes God closes doors so that we will wait for his time, and God's time is the best. Slide 3, please, Sophia. Year after year, Elkanah went to Shiloh with his family to make sacrifices to the Lord. This is where the Ark of the Covenant was located before it was transferred to Jerusalem. This was a joyful occasion. It was a time for feasting. Peninnah knew how to make these yearly trips more painfully for Hannah. Peninnah was jealous of Hannah and found many ways to make her suffer. Instead of feeling sorry for Hannah and comforting her in her disappointment, Peninnah reminded Hannah that she didn't have children. Peninnah's actions were deliberate. She wanted to hurt Hannah, and she succeeded. Elkanah gave Peninnah enough portions of the sacrificial meat for her and her children. And then Elkanah gave Hannah double portion of the sacrificial meat. He was showing her that even though she didn't have a son, she was special to him, that he wanted everyone to know that he loved her. Elkanah asked Hannah, "Why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Am I not worth 10 sons to you?" He could not understand her grief. As much as he loved her, he could not comfort her. He thought that all his wealth and what he provided as a husband was what she really needed. She could explain to him that she wanted to have a child. Slide 4, please. The feast was over. Elkanah, Peninnah, and Hannah and her children had all finished eating and drinking. Hannah was very upset and hadn't eaten at all. She got up and went to the temple to be by herself. High priest Eli was sitting near the doorpost. Hannah did not see him as she entered. Her focus was on God. She felt confident that she would be heard. She was full of sadness and grief as she cried and prayed to the Lord. This was her prayer from the heart, an honest prayer. She told the Lord everything she was feeling. When we come to pray, we are afraid to be honest. We're afraid to say to the Lord what we are really feeling. We should come to Lord and say, "Lord, it just isn't fair. I'm bitter. I'm angry." It's very important to be honest with God and to tell him how we are feeling. Why? Because he knows anyway. So it's no surprise to him, but it makes us feel good to tell him. And then God just moves in with his reassurance and his comfort. So this is a question I'm asking. Why did Hannah want a child before she made the vow with God? What was her reason? Was it for herself, or to be vindicated as a woman, or for her own pleasure, to please her husband, to top Peninnah's harassment and everyone else who criticized her? Her own sense of worth? All of those motives are based on human pride. A lot of times our reasons are the same. It's self-esteem. It's so that we will be accepted by others. It's for personal happiness. These motives are not good enough for God. Eli the priest, watching her, assumed she was drunk. He was outraged that she would approach the shrine drunk and said so, telling her she was making a drunken spectacle of herself. She replied that she was deeply unhappy, but certainly not drunk. Hannah's prayer was intense and emotional. She trusted that God was able to do this miracle for which she asked. She knew he was the only one who could hear her prayer and bring an answer to her longing. She made a vow at that time. She said to God, she will give her son, she will dedicate him to the Lord's work, and he would live at the temple. She didn't even have a child yet, but she made up her mind that if she had a child, he would be a Nazarite. A Nazarite was someone fully separated or set apart for God. There were 3 things that a Nazarite could not do. He was never to cut his hair. He was never to touch anything dead. He was never to drink from the fruit of the vine. She was saying, I'm going to give this child, this son, back to you, Lord. She wanted a son because, of course, a son carried on the father's name. But a son would be the one who could serve the Lord in the tabernacle. Slide 5, please. Eli recognizes that Hannah is telling the truth, and he pronounces a blessing on her. In keeping with his priestly office, he didn't know what Hannah had asked God, but he gave her his blessing of peace and he prays that God will grant her request. Hannah humbly identifies herself as his servant and asks to find favor in his eyes. Hannah knows that as a priest, Eli represents God to people. Hannah is really submitting herself to God and his will here. She's humbly seeking God's favor and grace. And then she answers, "May your servant find favor in your eyes." And then she went away. In the New Testament, we come across a woman who was persistent in her faith and took action on her faith. And this is the woman with the issue of blood. Her story is found in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Slide 6, please. Jesus was on his way to a synagogue leader's house to heal his dying daughter when the unnamed woman sees him and follows him. The woman had a bleeding condition, and this had been going on for 12 years, and that's a very long time. She had spent all her money on treatments from doctors, and nothing had helped. In fact, things had got worse. The Jewish law declared her to be unclean because of a bleeding issue. She wasn't allowed in the temple for any religious ceremonies. According to the law, anything or anyone she touched became unclean as well. As she was in the crowd pressing around Jesus, this meant that each person she bumped into her would have become unclean, including Jesus. But after 12 years of suffering, she was desperate for a miracle. She came behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I could touch his clothes, I will be healed. As soon as the woman touches Jesus, her bleeding stops and she knows she's been healed. In an instant, Jesus does what no doctor in 12 years had been able to do. This proves the power of Christ, of course, but it also illustrates an important point about Jesus and the law. The woman did not make Jesus unclean, but he made her clean. People were pushing and pressing into him from all over, yet he stops, turns and asks, "Who touched my clothes?" The disciples were surprised, but Jesus knew that healing power had gone out of him. We can't steal a miracle from God. After the woman comes forward and explains herself, Jesus clears up any misconceptions about her healing, saying, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." God is moved to action by our faith, even when he's in the middle of doing something else. Jesus would have healed the woman and kept on walking. Only he and the woman would have known what had taken place. But he didn't do that. Jesus stopped what he was doing and acknowledged the result of the woman's faith, a complete and instant healing. If we seek him in faith, he's there for us. He's interested in us. He wants us to know us. He longs to restore us, to respond to our faith in love. Going back to Hannah, God had not yet answered Hannah's prayer. She didn't know if God was going to give her a son. Yet her spirit was lifted. She went her way. She finally ate something. Her face was no longer downcast. Slide 7 and 8 after that, please. In the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, which means God has heard. When Samuel was around 3 years old, Hannah fulfilled her vow by giving young Samuel to Eli's care. She didn't run away and tell God it was too difficult to let go. She believed that God's purposes for her son were far greater than hers. And she was obedient and faithful to her word. She went on to have 3 sons and 2 daughters. While Hannah's womb was closed, God was preparing her for a great day, the birth of Samuel. Samuel went on to become the spiritual leader of Israel. As the prophet and judge of the nation, Samuel anointed the nation's first two kings, Saul and David. What did Hannah personally learn about God from her suffering? She learned to depend on him. He listened to her. He answered her prayer. He proved to her that he loved her and he was interested in her every details of her life, that he accepted her. She experienced his power and his fruitfulness, and she learned that her truest joy was in God alone. Hannah's story is a powerful one of strength, courage, persistent prayer, and unwavering commitment to seeking God's face. She faced challenges. She faced challenging circumstances, felt discouraged and angry with God. Despite her challenges, feelings of rejection and abandonment, she did not stop praying. She prayed when she was unsure if she would ever have children, and she prayed when God blessed her with a son. If you are in a season of ongoing adversity, challenges, or opposition, be encouraged by Hannah's story and her resilience in seeking God. Continue to be persistent in prayer. Surrender all your emotions to God. Remember God's faithfulness and speak victory despite opposition. Prayer is a powerful tool, and God wants us to use to stay connected with Him, strengthen our spiritual maturity, and use as a weapon to overcome the tactics of the enemy. When difficulties come, the good news is that God desires for us to draw closer to Him, and we are victorious through Christ Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, Neeta. Thank you for the powerful.
Sorry, Jerish, I've still got something to say. I just want to give a short testimony. I won't go into too many details because it's a long story. In 1993, I was diagnosed with kidney failure, and I was told I would need to go on dialysis. And in 1994, I started dialysis. 1995, I was given, asked to come for a transplant. And when the transplant was taking place, it seems there were some complications, and the transplant didn't take work anyway. And because of the complications, I was in a coma for about 3 days. And all my friends and family, they were all praying for me. The doctors had said there was no hope, but the prayers were answered, and I was okay. I came out of it, and I was on dialysis from then on. Thank God for my parents who were there to help with the children and help us to come through a lot of things. All our friends and family everywhere were praying for me. Started dialysis in 95. In 98, I was called again for a transplant. I had a transplant in 98, which lasted for 21 years. And in 2012, I had cancer. But even though I didn't understand what cancer was when I was told I had cancer, I found out later on what it really means. But God was with me in that also. And my chemotherapy started on Good Friday, early morning, I think about 2 o'clock in the morning or something. And that was the first time I had the first chemo. The next day, Good Friday, a lot of people came to visit me in hospital, especially after finishing the Good Friday service. And the ward was filled up Indian people praying for everybody. And I think that was probably the first time that ward must have been fully prayed up, and God was there we could tell God was there. You know, the atmosphere was different. And I came through that. After 6 chemos, everything was okay, and I've been okay since then. Nothing's come back. Thank God for that. And 2018, again, I was told my kidney is reducing function, and I would probably need another transplant or go back on dialysis. So they said if there's anybody from the family who can donate, it'll be good. I didn't want my children to give their kidney, but Robert agreed to give his kidney, but we are not a match, so I could not have a transplant straight away as you would expect it to be done. So we had to find, it's called a pool donor scheme. We had to find a donor from another person who also needed a kidney from their family. So yeah, the donor was found, and the transplant was fixed for June 2019. I went in for the transplant. I had some kind of cough, and the doctor said because of this cough, they can't do the transplant, and then it was canceled again. Then they fixed it again for September 2019. I went into hospital 2 days before the transplant. The same thing happened. I had some infection, which they couldn't find out what it was. The transplant was canceled. And then they said, we'll have to wait for 2020 for me to recover fully. But 2020 brought COVID-19. So everything came to a standstill. December 2020, I was given a date for transplant. But a week before, again, they said the COVID has increased and the transplant is canceled again. So we are in 2021. I'm still waiting for God's timing, but I believe He's got better things for me. Just like Hannah waited, I'm waiting. Thank you.